last of the cloak stood the last of 72. So take these 72 verses of love to aid you in awe of your revolution. The cloak was a mere cloak until blessed by your light. Like all things you touch, you gave it both soul and sight, making it strive for perfection. Hussein is not a name, rather the beat of a heart, closer than all things, though he exists worlds apart, a breath of determination. The eye sees not this world, but sees only his love. All love is a lie, his love a truth to be proud of, for it strengthens one's vision. The ship of salvation sails through the sea of despair. When the lungs drown in grief, upon its deck we find air. When all other ships have sunken, his flag guides the oppressed to the shore of his embrace. A sanctuary for those in need rests behind his gates, a haven of protection. His name sparks a fire in all those that are held down. You'll see servants rise up to destroy a tyrant's crown, leaving thrones withered and broken. For Hussein is not a man, Hussein is an ideal. The oppressed, they feel his love, and to it they salute and kneel, for their own hearts it has stolen. When you see them rise up and break the jaw of tyranny, know that grown have the roses of Hussein's own duty. To the heartbeat the ears listen. A Qurayshi child stood beneath the Yemeni cloak, who made his mother weep when from within her womb he spoke of his day of tribulation. The Jesus of Fatima bore no news to soothe her. He sought to build Jerusalem in Iraq, Karbala, with the blood of Bani Hashim. In the bliss of your infancy, a cloak to you bowed, and yet with your death you lay there bare without a shroud. How could such a tragedy happen? Fatima wept before her beloved had been born. Oh my father, for my beloved who will mourn? He speaks to me from within. My child tells me that to a distant land he'll be led. Alone and thirsty in Iraq, my child they'll behead, his bone crushed to meet his skin. Muhammad replied, O Fatima, Allah will create a nation that will lament Hussein and lament for generations in sets of 40 days and 10. And on the day of Ashura, the earth itself stops spinning. You'll see them come running, bathed in the tears they're crying. In their millions, the dust of the very heavens descends for their cause, and the spin of the earth for their marches shall pause. The sun's light upon them shall lighten. You'll know how a man lived by knowing how he died, and by knowing Hussein's death. Although his death lied, Hussein had lived in oppression. Yet he is beyond life and knows not of its constraints. The dead cling to his soul, hoping that life they would taste in yearning of resurrection. Hussein's birth is a truth, and Hussein's death is a lie. Like Jesus alive, but unlike him he cannot die. The dead from his love awaken. The world needed love, and how much of it he'd fulfill. The love of Hussein would make Muhammad's own heart still. Steady seas on a vast ocean. An infant that was no older than the age of 1. Hussein had become like the last messenger's own son. What joy he found in his children. The Master of Martyrs had climbed the Prophet's own back. While he was bowed in prayer, upon his back they both sat, Hassan and Hussein in unison. He kept still as they sat, the Prophet of all mercy, and when descended had the 2 moons of Ali, to his prayer he would return. He was but a mere child, and yet the priests of Najran feared what would happen if to heaven he'd turn his palms, and Mubahala they'd abandon. When those in need would come, they'd direct them to his prayer. Those who came to him, saying children they could not bear, would be granted many children. In the mosque of Ahmed, he would sit on Ahmed's lap, who'd tell people remember him, in case they forgot when on him the nation would turn. He spoke the sweetest of words, and what wisdom they contain. Hussein is from me, and indeed I am from Hussein, words worthy of contemplation. It's as if Hussein had heard reed in Mount Hira, and Ahmed was surrounded alone in Karbala, 2 souls that are almost one. To know a man's life, know his relationship with God. Hussein and God were connected like man and his beloved. Love bound him into submission. They say his best friend was Ibn Mudahir, but surely his best friend was his devotion to his prayer. To the stars at night he would glisten. Destined to die thirsty, he'd embrace the pangs of thirst, refuse his gut its desire, while the sun with him fasts from the moment it had risen. As if tied to divine will, the Kaaba he would circle, circling both the Kaaba and his own father's cradle. Hajj and his soul were interwoven, for he knew fear of God was the highest of belief. Fear chains up man, but fear of God sets a man free. He was the father of freedom. As much as he feared God, Hussein adored the poor. He'd give whatever he owned until he could give no more. He sought to kill destitution. And at night, when none saw him except the light of the stars, he'd seek out Medina's hungry and seek to soothe their scars, and food he would provide them. The sacks of bread he'd carry left scars upon his skin. Far be it that any orphan from hunger would grow thin. Hussein's love was their nutrition. He would not be killed were he not mercy from above. It was not Hussein they feared, rather they feared love. With hatred their hearts were ridden. Hearts that fear love will seek to extinguish its light. Be it that with it its family must meet their plight. Be it that angels are left broken. Hussein and Hassan were twinned, like the prongs of Dhul Fiqar. Souls yearn heaven to see these brothers as their master and yearn their sins be forgiven. Hussein did not bury Hassan, but rather he buried himself, left with just his body after burying his self. What an incredible burden! But for the son of Ahmed stood the son of Ali. The hands that protect the eyes so that the eyes could see. al-Baneen's own mountain. The ship of salvation sails with the best of all masts, for its sail is a flag held by the hands of Abbas, to his master beholden. The two guarded their camp like lions guarding their pride, for in their camp the light of revelation resides, in the house of revelation. When the camp would stand to pray, the adhan would be read by another Ali who looks like Muhammad, Ali Akbar, his eldest son. As the camp fell prostrate, stood firm with salvation's ship. Angels stood in awe, watching the beauty of worship in Ali Zain al-Abidin. When Hussein was young, he was soothed by a divine cloak. This cloak became human, and to Hussein she spoke, saying, "Brother, will you return?" He'd reply, "No, my Zainab, but this is far from the end. See all of this as beauty, as angels shall descend to lament our afflictions." In each soul lived Hussein, and they saw only Hussein. They gave up all of themselves till only he remained. That is love, without question. Hussein in his mercy allows his companions leave, but his love imprisoned and shackled them into belief, because his love is magnetism. They say, "This is tough, Karbala, the place of our rebirth. The heavens are made up of the soil of its earth. Upon our hearts its roots stand firm." At the door of the battle stood Hur al-Riyahi, who realized that choosing death over life made him truly free. Free, as his mother had named him. And free he fled to God's joy, though it was his death. For the end of his life was better than a single breath of life in humiliation. His companions stepped forward, and they were like no other, for they did not err or question or flee their leader. There were no greater companions. They were not men, but titans, be it Zuhair or Burair, be it Muslim or Abis. They knew not of fear, the blades of swords they would welcome. Be it John the servant or Al-Mudahir the sheikh, with the sand as their canvas, legends they'd create, inspiring generations. When the dust had settled, set out Ali Akbar, Hussein defended by Muhammad, his grandfather, yet his own ummah basked in treason. When the men had all been killed, only Abbas was left, his heart heavy as the thirsty cries would attest. And to the river charged this lion. At the river's edge he dipped his hands for a sip, but he threw the water back exactly where he found it. He would not drink before Hussein. The water musk by his side, they cut off both his hands. The flag fell before his body upon the burning sands, and mourn its moon did the sun. his 6-month-old thirsty, Hussein raised it in his arms, as around his fingers were wrapped its tiny palms. He cried out, "What is his sin?" The only reply came as a 3-pronged arrow. Hussein died before his death, feeling his infant's blood flow. His infant's blood stained his own skin. Muhammad's grandson bid his women and children farewell, as Zainab told herself, "What you see is beautiful," as she embraced the new orphans. Hussein charged into battle like his father Haydar, thousands of marhabs between him and his hereafter, as Kawthar blossomed in preparation. They rained arrows upon him and they eclipsed the sun's light. Ahmed's grandson fell as Izzah laughed in delight, and Badr's fallen stood in elation. Shimr sat upon the chest of divine revelation and severed the neck of Muhammad's own grandson as the earth shook in lamentation. Hussein's death was a death that was like no other, for with it injustice grew, and love itself would falter, with it mercy and compassion. He stood firm against injustice and stood firm against strife. Hussein did not back down until it cost him his own life, an eternal, undying lesson. His death was not in vain, for there are those who won't forget, whose hearts break at his mention as their eyes become wet. His stand inspired a nation of dignity bathed in its tears, a nation of morals worth 1,000 years, the crown upon creation. Zainab led the captives, a woman leading the way. She'd whisper to herself as in shackles they would sway, "Our revolution has begun, for all death is a truth, but for Hussein it was a lie. Hussein cannot be forgotten. Hussein will not die, for in his light we reawaken."